My wife told me she would be happy if I disappeared. She said it in front of 43 guests, 2 waiters, several relatives, most of our friends, and 3 people who had done business with me long enough to know that humiliating me publicly was generally not considered a brilliant investment strategy. For a few seconds, the entire restaurant went silent. My wife smiled. She thought she had won. She expected me to raise my voice, throw a glass, threaten someone, or deliver the kind of angry speech that would allow her to spend the next 10 years telling people how I had ruined her birthday. Instead, I looked at her and said, "Fine, just don't ever say I never gave you what you wanted." But I am getting ahead of myself. My name is Richard Hale. I was 51 years old at the time, which meant I had reached the wonderful stage of life where young people assumed I could not understand technology, while older people assumed I should already know better. I owned a significant share of a logistics and development company that I had helped build from the ground up. It was not glamorous work. Nobody made television shows about men negotiating warehouse leases, studying transport costs, and preventing grown adults in expensive suits from lying to each other. Still, it paid well. Very well. I had a good reputation, a comfortable life, and enough experience to know that when someone described himself as a visionary entrepreneur, I should immediately check whether my wallet was still in my pocket. I was not a saint. I could be stubborn. I disliked repeating myself. I had very little patience for stupidity disguised as confidence, which unfortunately meant I had very little patience for approximately half the business world. But I loved my wife. Her name was Laura. We had been married for 18 years. When I first met her, she was sharp, funny, ambitious, and capable of walking into a room full of strangers as if they had all been waiting for her personally. I admired that about her. Over the years, I supported her through several career changes, 2 failed business ideas, 1 brief obsession with becoming an interior designer, and a 6-month period during which every object in our house was apparently the wrong energy. I paid for the new furniture. Laura enjoyed beautiful things, large gatherings, and the particular kind of attention that required other people to stop talking when she entered a room. Her 45th birthday was supposed to be the social event of the season. At least, that was how she described it. I would have described it as a birthday dinner, but apparently that was because I lacked imagination. She booked a private hall in one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. There would be live music, imported flowers, a custom cake, professional photographs, and enough champagne to make several marriages temporarily seem healthier than they actually were. Laura had been planning it for almost 3 months. She discussed tablecloths with the intensity of a general preparing for war. One evening, she held up 2 nearly identical shades of cream fabric and asked me which one looked more elegant. I made the mistake of pointing out that they were both cream. She stared at me for a long moment. "One is ivory," she said, "and the other? Pearl." Naturally, I apologized to both colors. I had no objection to the expense. We could afford it, and Laura rarely asked for anything halfway. If she wanted a quiet dinner, she invited 12 people. If she wanted a celebration, local fire regulations became a personal insult. More importantly, that birthday was supposed to mark the beginning of something new for her. For several years, Laura had talked about launching her own high-end event and hospitality consultancy. She had taste, connections, and enough confidence. The problem was that confidence and a business plan were not technically the same thing. I had spent months quietly helping her prepare. I introduced her to accountants, lawyers, suppliers, and potential clients. I reviewed her projections, corrected several numbers that appeared to have been chosen for their emotional appeal, and arranged financing that would allow her to start properly. But that was only part of what I had planned. The morning after her birthday, we were scheduled to meet with our attorney. I intended to transfer a share of our family business into Laura's name. I had also agreed to place our country house entirely under her ownership. She loved that house. She had redesigned it 3 times, which meant I had technically paid for it 4 times. In addition, I was going to fund the launch of her company and approve a substantial investment in a new venture run by her younger brother, Daniel. Daniel had the confidence of a man who had never been forced to survive entirely on the consequences of his own decisions. Still, Laura believed in him. And because I believed in Laura, I had agreed to take the risk. She did not know any of this yet. I wanted it to be a surprise. Inside the gift box I planned to give her at dinner was a diamond necklace she had admired months earlier and a handwritten note. The note said, "Tomorrow, I'll give you the independence you've always wanted." 3 days before the party, I came home early from a meeting and found Laura in the dining room with a printed guest list. She was checking names and making small notes beside them. I poured myself a glass of water and glanced at the pages. Most of the names were familiar. Family members, close friends, a few of Laura's former colleagues, several of my business associates, and people whose exact connection to us I had never understood, but who appeared reliably whenever expensive food was available. Then I saw one name near the bottom of the second page, Victor Lang. I stopped reading. "Why is Victor Lang on the guest list?" Laura did not look up. "Because I invited him." Yes, I gathered that from the advanced detective work of seeing his name under the word guests. "Why did you invite him?" She sighed as if I had interrupted her during delicate surgery, rather than while she was deciding who should sit near the cake. "He's working with Daniel on a few things." "Daniel is working with Victor?" "Possibly." "Laura." She finally looked at me. "What? You know what Victor tried to do?" Of course she knew. Everyone close to me knew. Victor had once been my business partner. 10 years earlier, we had started negotiating a major development project together. During those negotiations, he secretly contacted one of our competitors, passed them confidential information, and attempted to structure the deal so that I would carry most of the financial risk while he walked away with control. It was not a misunderstanding. It was not a difference of opinion. It was an attempted professional execution conducted by a man who wore handmade shoes and used the word friendship whenever he was about to lie. I discovered what he was doing before the contracts were signed. Victor lost the deal, lost several important relationships, and spent the next decade telling people that I had destroyed him because I could not tolerate competition. Personally, I tolerated competition very well. What I did not tolerate was being stabbed in the back by a man who then complained that my spine had damaged his knife. Laura knew every detail. She had been beside me when it happened. "He's not coming," I said. Her expression changed immediately. Not to surprise, to irritation. "This is my birthday, Richard. I'm aware. I can invite whoever I want. And I can refuse to sit at the same table with a man who tried to ruin me. Oh, please, that was 10 years ago. Yes, betrayal becomes adorable once it reaches double digits." She put down her pen. "Daniel says Victor has changed. Daniel also once invested in a restaurant because the owner gave him free drinks. That has nothing to do with this. It explains the quality of his judgment." Laura folded her arms. "You're being difficult." "No, I'm being clear." She stared at me, and I could see that familiar calculation behind her eyes. She was deciding whether to argue, charm me, or simply act as if the conversation had ended in her favor. She chose the third option. "Victor has already accepted." "Then uninvite him. I'm not humiliating a guest because you're holding on to some ancient grudge. He tried to steal a company from me, and failed. That doesn't improve the attempt." "You're 51 years old, Richard. Surely you can behave civilly for one evening." There it was, the quiet reversal. Victor's betrayal was no longer the problem. My unwillingness to smile at him over champagne was the problem. I leaned against the table and looked at my wife. "Let me make this simple. I will not start anything. I will not ruin your dinner. I will not drag him outside and introduce him to the pavement." "How generous. But if he starts taking shots at me, you stop him." Laura rolled her eyes. "It's my birthday. I don't want to spend the evening managing 2 grown men." "Then don't invite the one who behaves like a rat in cufflinks." She gave me a cold smile. You really do have to control everything, don't you? That was an interesting accusation from a woman who had just spent 40 minutes deciding the exact angle at which the napkins should face. I straightened. This isn't about control. This is about respect. She picked up her pen again. It's one dinner. Be civilized. And just like that, the discussion was over. At least she believed it was. I stood there for another few seconds, watching her add a small mark beside Victor's name. Then I noticed the seating arrangement. Victor Lang was not placed at some distant table among acquaintances and people we would never see again. He was seated at ours, directly across from me. The night of Laura's birthday, I arrived at the restaurant 10 minutes early. This was not because I was excited. It was because I had spent 30 years learning that arriving late to an expensive event guarantees two things. Everyone notices, and the parking becomes an archaeological problem. The private hall looked exactly as Laura had imagined it. Tall flower arrangements stood on every table. Soft lights reflected from crystal glasses. A pianist played near the windows. The cake waited on a separate table beneath a small spotlight. Laura stood near the entrance in a dark green dress, greeting guests as if she were accepting an award. She looked beautiful. That was the irritating part. Even after our argument, even after seeing Victor's name on the guest list, I looked at her and felt the same familiar pull I had felt for years. She stepped closer, adjusted my tie, and said, "Please don't look so serious tonight. I'm 51. This is just my face now." She exhaled through her nose. "Can we have one evening without tension?" "That depends. Did you invite the tension personally?" Her eyes narrowed. Before she could answer, one of her friends approached and kissed her on both cheeks with enough enthusiasm to qualify as a minor assault. Laura immediately turned away from me and returned to smiling. I stood there for a moment, holding the gift box in one hand. The necklace was inside. So was the note. "Tomorrow, I'll give you the independence you've always wanted. At that point, I still plan to keep every promise." That probably tells you something about me, or about optimism, or about the fact that even intelligent men can become absolute idiots when love is involved. Guests continued arriving. There was Martin Cole, an attorney who had the rare ability to make silence feel billable. There was Simon Hayes, one of our largest clients, who greeted me with a handshake and immediately complained about interest rates. There was Rebecca Sloan, a former colleague of Laura's, who knew everything about everyone and considered privacy a temporary inconvenience. Daniel arrived 20 minutes late. Naturally, Laura's younger brother had built an entire personality around arriving after everyone else and explaining why it had actually been a complicated business decision. He embraced Laura, kissed her cheek, and handed her a bottle of wine. "Traffic," he said to me. "You live 12 minutes away." "Construction." "There is no construction." He lowered his voice. I had to change shirts. "That must have been terrifying." Daniel grinned. He liked me, mostly because I had paid for several of his ideas and had not yet physically thrown him through a window. "Big day tomorrow," he said. He was referring to the investment. I had reviewed his proposal for a boutique property management company. The idea was not terrible, which was the highest compliment I had ever given one of Daniel's business plans. He knew I intended to approve the funding. He did not know that I had already instructed the attorney to prepare the final documents. "Tomorrow hasn't happened yet," I said. He laughed. "Always dramatic. Always solvent." He slapped my shoulder and moved toward the bar. Then Victor Lang walked in. He was wearing a charcoal suit, a silver tie, and the same confident smile he had worn 10 years earlier, while explaining why the evidence against him was merely a difference in interpretation. He entered with his wife, Elena, who looked uncomfortable before she had even removed her coat. That was probably because Elena had common sense. Victor did not. Laura saw them and immediately crossed the room. She hugged Elena, kissed Victor on the cheek, and welcomed them warmly enough that several people turned to look. Then she brought them directly toward me. Of course she did. Why place a lit match near gasoline when you can personally introduce them? "Richard," she said brightly, "look who's here." I looked. Victor smiled. Richard. Victor. He held out his hand. I looked at it for half a second before shaking it. His grip was firm. Mine was firmer. This is how middle-aged men communicate when murder would create paperwork. It's been a long time, he said. Not long enough. Victor smiled wider. Still direct. Still employed. His eyes flickered, only briefly, but I saw it. Laura touched my arm. Richard. What? We're being civilized. Elena looked at the floor. Victor laughed. I've missed your sense of humor. No, you haven't. Maybe not. A waiter approached with champagne. Victor took a glass. I did not. I had decided before arriving that I would stay completely sober. Not because I feared losing control, because if the evening went badly, I wanted to remember every word. Laura led Victor and Elena toward the main table. I remained where I was for a few seconds. A couple of minutes later, I also went to the table. The seating arrangement was exactly as I had seen it on Laura's list. Laura sat at the center. I sat to her right. Victor sat directly across from me. Elena sat beside him. Daniel sat near Victor. That explained part of the invitation. The two of them were already talking about Daniel's project. Victor leaned toward him, speaking quietly, using his hands in the theatrical way of a man who wanted nearby people to know he was discussing money. I took my seat. Laura glanced at me. Please, she whispered. I'm sitting. You know what I mean. Yes, you mean I should pretend you didn't seat a thief across from me at your birthday dinner. Her jaw tightened. Before she could respond, Rebecca Sloan took the seat on Laura's other side and began complimenting the flowers. The first course arrived. For a while, everything remained polite. People talked about work, travel, children, renovations, and all the other subjects adults use to avoid discussing anything real. Victor behaved himself. At first, he spoke about market conditions, a recent project, and the difficulties of finding competent contractors. I contributed very little, not because I was afraid to speak, because watching Victor behave politely was like watching a snake wear reading glasses. Interesting, but not reassuring. The first comment came during a conversation about expansion. Simon asked whether my company still planned to open another regional office. We're considering it, I said. Victor lifted his glass. Richard always was cautious. The words were harmless. The tone was not. Simon glanced between us. I smiled slightly. Caution is what people call preparation when they don't understand it. A few people laughed. Victor smiled. Of course. Though sometimes caution is just fear wearing a good suit. Daniel chuckled. Laura did too. That bothered me more than the comment. I looked at her. She noticed. Her smile faded for half a second. Then she turned toward Rebecca and asked about her children. The second comment came 10 minutes later. Martin was telling a story about a difficult negotiation we had handled years earlier. Victor interrupted. Richard always did enjoy making people wait. I enjoy letting people reveal how desperate they are, I said. Same thing, really. Only if you're the desperate one. That earned another laugh, this time louder. Victor took a drink. Laura smiled into her glass. I leaned closer to her. Stop encouraging him. Her expression remained pleasant for the room. I'm not encouraging anyone. You're laughing. It's a joke. No, a joke has structure. She turned her head slightly. Do not start. I haven't. I sat back. The waiter brought the next course. Victor began telling a story about the failed development deal from 10 years earlier. Not the true version. His version. In his version, we had disagreed over strategy. In his version, I had become paranoid. In his version, he had left because he did not want to work with someone who needed to control every decision. He did not mention the stolen documents. He did not mention the competitor. He did not mention the emails. He did, however, mention my temper. I told him, Victor said to the table, that no business survives if one man has to approve every breath taken in the building. Several people smiled politely. Simon looked down at his plate. Martin remained completely still. He knew the facts. So did Laura. I looked at Victor. You left out the part where you sent confidential information to our competitor. Victor sighed. Still holding on to that version? It was proven by lawyers. Yes, Victor. That's generally how proof works in business. Daniel shifted in his seat. Elena touched Victor's sleeve. Maybe we should talk about something else. Victor ignored her. I made a mistake, he said. A mistake is sending the wrong attachment. I looked around the table. Trying to put your partner in debt while taking control of his project requires planning. The room became quieter. Laura set down her glass. Richard. I turned to her. What? This is my birthday. Stop turning dinner into a trial. I stared at her. Victor leaned back in his chair. He was enjoying himself now. He had come for exactly this. Not to celebrate Laura, not to help Daniel. He had come to stand in front of people who respected me and see whether he could make me react. And Laura had seated him in the best possible position. I lowered my voice. He started this. She gave me a tired smile. You're both behaving like children, Victor laughed. Some things never change. Laura laughed with him. That was the moment I understood she was no longer trying to keep the peace. She was performing. She had an audience. The room was full of people whose attention mattered to her, and she had decided that the easiest way to look powerful was to make me look manageable. The meal continued. So did Victor. Every few minutes he found another way to insert a comment. When someone complimented our country house, Victor said, Laura always had better taste than Richard. Laura smiled. When Daniel discussed his business proposal, Victor said, Careful, Daniel. Richard will want veto power over the coffee machine. Laura laughed again. When Rebecca asked how Laura and I had stayed married for 18 years, Victor raised his glass and said, Strong contracts. That one earned a larger laugh, even from people who clearly knew they should not be laughing. I looked at Laura. She was enjoying the attention. Her cheeks were flushed from champagne. She had become louder as the evening progressed, more animated, more theatrical. I leaned toward her once more. This is getting out of hand. She kept smiling at the table. It's fine. No, it isn't. You're too sensitive. I nearly laughed. That phrase has probably ended more honest conversations than any sentence in human history. You invited him knowing what he did, and you agreed to behave. I am behaving. Then keep doing it. I looked across the table. Victor was watching us. He had heard enough to understand. His smile told me everything. I sat back and folded my hands. All right, I said quietly. Laura turned to me. What does that mean? It means I'm giving you one last chance to stop this. Her smile disappeared. Do not threaten me at my own birthday. I'm not threatening you. She held my gaze for a moment. Then someone called for a toast. Laura immediately stood. The room applauded. The lights dimmed slightly. The pianist stopped playing. Everyone raised a glass. I watched my wife smile at the people around her. She thanked her friends, her family, her colleagues, Daniel, and several guests who had helped organize the evening. Then she looked at me. And of course Richard, she said, who always makes sure everything is exactly the way he thinks it should be. People laughed. It was presented as affection. It was not affection. I smiled anyway. Victor raised his glass toward me. To Richard, he said, the only man I know who can turn generosity into a management style. More laughter. I looked at Laura. She could have stopped it then. One sentence would have been enough. That's enough, Victor. Or even, leave my husband alone. Instead, she laughed harder than anyone. Then she looked at me and said, Oh, don't make that face. You know it's true. The room went very still inside me, not outside. Outside, people were still smiling. Glasses were still raised. The candles were still burning. But inside me, something stopped. I put my glass down, carefully. Then I looked at my wife and said, Laura, Enough. She stared at me. A small warning. A final one. But she had been drinking. She was surrounded by attention. And she had convinced herself that I would never force her to face a consequence in public. So she smiled, rolled her eyes, and decided to prove to the entire room who was in charge. Laura looked around the room before answering me. Not at me, at the audience. She had that smile people wear when they think they're about to deliver the line everyone will remember. She took another sip of champagne. "Oh my God, Richard," she said loudly. "Would you stop ruining my birthday for 5 minutes?" A few guests smiled awkwardly. I said nothing. She laughed. "You always have to be the center of everything." I kept looking at her. "Laura." She waved her hand dismissively. "No, seriously, sometimes I think if you just disappeared, I'd actually be happier." Silence. Complete silence. Even the waiter froze. Someone at the far end let out a nervous chuckle before realizing nobody else was laughing. Laura expected me to explode. She wanted me to. An angry husband would immediately become the villain of the evening. Instead, I stood up slowly, looked her straight in the eyes, and spoke calmly. "Fine." Another pause. "Just don't ever tell people I never gave you what you wanted." Her smile faded. I picked up the gift box I'd brought, walked around the table, placed it in front of her. "Happy birthday, Laura." She blinked. "You're seriously leaving?" "Yes." "Oh, don't be so dramatic." I smiled for the first time that evening. "Actually, Laura, I'm being surprisingly reasonable." Daniel stood up. "Richard, come on. She didn't mean it." I looked at him. Then perhaps she should have said what she meant. Victor leaned back in his chair with a smug grin. "Well, this escalated." I turned to him. "You've wanted to see me humiliated for 10 years. His smile widened. "Looks like you finally got your wish." I looked at Laura one last time. She still expected me to come back, to cool off, to return in 20 minutes after everyone convinced me to apologize. She knew me, or at least she thought she did. Without another word, I walked toward the exit. Nobody stopped me. Behind me, I heard whispers. What just happened? Did they have a fight before this? Is he really leaving? I drove home instead of to a hotel. Not because I intended to stay, because there were things I needed to do. I walked into the house just after 11. The silence felt strange. Laura had spent weeks planning that party. Tomorrow morning at 10, we were supposed to meet our attorney. The folder was already waiting in my office. I opened it. Transfer of my business shares. Transfer of the country house. Funding agreement for Laura's company. Investment approval for Daniel's project. Nearly $7 million in total commitments. I sat there for several minutes. Then I remembered her words. If you disappeared, I'd be happier. I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear. I picked up my phone. "Martin." My attorney answered immediately. "I thought you'd still be at the party." I left. A short pause. "That bad?" "Worse." "What do you need?" "Cancel tomorrow." "All of it?" "All of it." "And Daniel's investment?" I looked once more at the folder. "Yes." Martin didn't ask why. He'd known me for 20 years. "If you're calling at this hour," he said, "I'm assuming you've already made the decision." "I have. I'll stop everything first thing in the morning." "Thank you." After hanging up, I took the folder, locked it back in the safe. Then I went upstairs. I packed one suitcase, clothes, laptop, passport, documents, a few personal things. Before Laura came home, I left. I didn't slam the door. I didn't leave an angry note. I simply disappeared, exactly the way she'd asked. I headed to my apartment on the other side of town. At 9:17 a.m., my phone rang. I let it ring. Then again, then again. On the fourth call, I answered. "Richard, where the hell are you?" "At home." "You're not home." "Correct. I'm at my home." "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means I moved." She laughed. Not because it was funny, because she still thought this was a performance. Oh, stop acting like a child. I thought you wanted me gone. Don't twist my words. I don't need to. A pause. Then her voice hardened. We have an appointment with Martin in 40 minutes. Not anymore. What? I canceled it. Silence. You're joking. No. And Daniel's investment? Yes. You can't do that. Already done. She raised her voice. Richard, this is insane. No. Insane would have been signing everything after hearing my own wife say she'd be happier if I disappeared. You're overreacting. I disagree. You're punishing me. No. What then? I stopped tying my future to someone who doesn't respect me. She hung up. An hour later, Daniel called. What the hell happened? You tell me. You just destroyed my deal. No, Laura did. She made one stupid joke. She publicly wished I disappeared. She didn't mean it. She had plenty of chances to say that before I left. He had no answer. Within a week, reality caught up with Laura. Her project lost its funding. Daniel's company never launched. The attorney returned every unsigned document. People started talking. Not about me. About her. Everyone had seen what happened. Everyone knew I'd walked out without yelling. Everyone knew she'd laughed while another man mocked her husband. The story spread exactly the way stories always do. Each retelling made her look worse. 3 weeks later, Martin called. The people from Harrington Global reached out again. I remembered immediately. 3 years earlier, they had offered to buy my stake and put me in charge of their European operations. I had declined. Laura didn't want to leave the country. They heard you're considering selling your shares, Martin said. They'd like to continue the conversation. What if I say yes? Then you'll be running their European division from London. I looked out the window. 3 years ago, I chose my marriage. This time, there was no marriage left to choose. I'll take the meeting. 2 days later, Laura showed up at my office. The receptionist called me. Your wife is here. Ex-wife. Not officially. Give it time. She says it's urgent. She refuses to leave. I sighed. Send her in. She walked into my office looking nothing like the woman from her birthday. No expensive dress. No confident smile. No audience. Richard, what do you need? Can we please talk? We're talking. I made a mistake. I didn't think you'd actually leave. I know. I was angry. You were entertained. Tears filled her eyes. I never wanted this. You wanted me gone. No, You got exactly what you asked for. She reached for my hand. I moved it away. For the first time since our marriage began, she realized I wasn't coming back. 3 months later, I signed the papers selling my stake in the company I had helped build for over 20 years. It wasn't an emotional decision anymore. It was simply time. By then, the divorce papers had already been filed. I heard later how Laura discovered everything. Not from me, from Martin. She had gone to his office hoping there was still some way to stop the divorce. Instead, she asked him a question. Was Richard really going to transfer everything? Martin looked at her for a long time before answering. He was. She thought he meant the business funding. He didn't. He opened a file and placed several unsigned documents on the desk. Transfer of part of my company, transfer of the country house, funding for her new business, approval of Daniel's investment. Laura just stared at them. Martin quietly added, He spent months preparing all of this. He wanted your birthday present to change your life. Laura broke down right there in his office, not because of the money, because for the first time, she understood what she had destroyed. The night she told everyone she'd be happier if I disappeared. I had been planning to give her everything she'd dreamed about for years. After that, she called me almost every day. At first, I didn't answer. Then she started leaving voice messages. I know the truth. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I was showing off. I wanted everyone to laugh. I never imagined what you were planning. Finally, I answered one call. She was crying before I even spoke. "Please, tell me there's still a chance." "There isn't. I'll give everything back. It was never about getting something back. I'll apologize to everyone. I love you." "I don't doubt that." "Then why can't we fix this?" I was silent for a moment. Then I answered, "Because the moment you chose to humiliate me in front of a room full of people, you showed me something I'd never seen before. And once you see it, you can't pretend it doesn't exist." She whispered, "I made the biggest mistake of my life." "Yes, you did." The day I left for London, she came to the airport. I saw her before she saw me. She looked tired. She ran toward me. "Richard, please. I've already signed everything. Don't go." "I have to. I'll move to London." I smiled sadly. If I wanted to build a new life with you, I wouldn't have left the old one. She couldn't hold back the tears anymore. "I'm sorry. I'll regret this forever." "I know." The boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. I picked up my carry-on. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then I said, "I really did give you what you asked for." She closed her eyes. I nodded once, turned around, and walked toward the gate. I never looked back. Some people lose a marriage because they stop loving each other. We lost ours because one of us stopped respecting the other. She wanted to feel powerful for a few seconds in front of a room full of people. Instead, with a single sentence, she showed everyone which one of us was actually willing to walk away. A year after I boarded that flight to London, my life looked nothing like it had before. I had settled into my new role, made new friends, and for the first time in years, woke up without feeling responsible for someone else's happiness. Selling my share of the company had given me financial freedom. The new position had given me a challenge and peace. That was something I had to earn myself. I never remarried. I wasn't looking to. For the first time in a long time, I was perfectly content with my own company. As for Laura, I heard about her only through mutual friends. Her business never really recovered after losing the funding. She eventually sold the large house and moved into a small apartment. According to the people who still knew her, she kept the little note from my birthday gift in a frame beside her bed. "Tomorrow, I'll give you the independence you've always wanted." They said she read it whenever she blamed herself for how everything ended. I don't know if that's true. And honestly, it didn't matter anymore. People often think the biggest regret in life comes from losing money, success, or opportunities. I don't. The biggest regrets come from the words we can never take back. One careless sentence cost Laura the marriage we'd spent 18 years building. As for me, I didn't disappear. I simply walked toward a life where I was finally respected. And sometimes, that's the bravest thing a person can do. If you felt this story hit hard, drop a like, subscribe for more, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support keeps Steelheart beating.